Welcome to Cardano Over Coffee. We proudly present a bowl of Mac with Cal from Epoch Sec. Today, we talk about scams and how you can protect yourself.
All right, if y'all are ready, I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's your Friday bowl of Mac. Today I am Kyle, or Epoch Sec, or Holy Macaroni. I'm here to share the topic of the week around a security-related topic. That topic is avoiding scammers using my own personal thought process. So over the years, I've developed a lot of different techniques and concerns and strategies and thoughts on how I approach something if somebody randomly messages me, or if I see a new project coming out, or if I see a very popular news article coming out, or something like that. So over the last few weeks, I've talked about different ways of using different tools out there and concepts and other things that can help you along this process. But today I wanted to talk about my own personal thought process. I will disclaim that I'm going to be talking for about 5 minutes. So everything that, if you're on here and you have an opinion or some other idea about how to help people, this is not going to be 100% all inclusive. This is just a good starting point for you to develop your own or improve your own thought process. So the first tip is tip number one: recognizing the signs. This is really your initial early warning signs. These should be things that you can immediately identify within moments or seconds that something could be potentially malicious, or a bad actor, or even something safe. So things such as unsolicited communications, right? If somebody is reaching out to you and you've never talked to them before, you'll want to do certain things, and then we'll get in some of the other tips. We'll talk about the things you'll want to do. But if somebody reaches out to you and maybe they're just starting a casual conversation, or maybe they are trying to offer you something of high value or something like that. Also, high pressure techniques, or creating that sense of urgency. That is a very common tactic. These are kind of social engineering tactics, but they're kind of signs you'll look for almost immediately, right? Like I'm saying, too good to be true offers, or giveaways where they're wanting some of your own personal information, or if they're wanting something up front in return for something they're going to give you. So that's tip number one: recognizing the early signs, identifying things that stick out to you, to early on avoid something potentially risky. So tip number two: trust but verify. Now, this is an old school phrase. I think Ronald Reagan might have been the person to coin it. Don't quote me on that. But the trust but verify phrase, or more adapted to today, is really don't trust, verify. But this topic, or this tip, is really around checking. You kind of looked at your initial warning signs and everything, and now you're at the point to where you need to verify who, are the people or the team reaching out to you who they say they are. So you'll want to check their online presence. You'll want to look at different references or reviews. You'll want to share, do they share any activities or channels with you if you're in a big community like the Cardano community? Do any of your friends or any of your people you're associated with happen to know them or following them or anything like that? Really, what you're doing here is looking for impersonation techniques, right? So a lot of times a very good effective tactic by a bad actor will be to wait for a big news announcement that becomes very popular, and then they'll start creating accounts to impersonate that public figure or that public team along with that news announcement, and try to use that to get somebody to try to execute an attack or a threat. Also, checking their social media accounts, are those legitimate or are they fake? So you're really looking at all of these things to check out, is this a real person or a real team, or whatever they say they are. So the next tip is researching and gathering information. This is so after you've done those initial two things, which should really only take you a minimal amount of time, then you're going into the more longer enduring process of researching and gathering. This one, you're armed with some early assessment and you're digging deeper, you're researching the subject at hand, and can it be verified, right? So what you're really doing is you're going to take a new cryptocurrency project, for example. You want to dig into their background, you'll want to dig into the technology, their market performance, their team, and the individuals on that team. Look at how they communicate. That is a very common thing that I personally do. I'll look at how the team, or even the individuals within the team, communicate. If I feel that I strongly disagree with the way they communicate, and I think that could be negatively impactful to the future duration of the project, I will use that as one of the red flags. Now, I will pause there and say that I never use just one flag to make a decision. What I'm doing is using a lot of these different tips, and I'm building a set of flags or things to come to a correlation, to a decision of whether I think this thing is potentially malicious or something that I don't want to be involved with, whether malicious or not, or something decent and good, right? So a phrase I always share with people, and I've shared on this space plenty of times as well. There's a phrase I share with people. So I would rather miss 9 out of 10 good opportunities rather than getting compromised 1 out of 100 times. So if that new cryptocurrency project is coming out and you have an opportunity to get in early, but they're launching later that day, you realize you don't have enough time to complete that research to make an effective decision. Well, stop right there. Do not get involved and continue that research. That research and that knowledge and making that decision point is much more important than ever getting involved at any point in any project. So the next one is assessing credibility. So here you're really doing two things. You're assessing the credibility of the individual or the team reaching out to you, but throughout your research, you're gathering a lot of information from different news outlets and different sources. Well, you want to assess the credibility of them too. You don't want to just use Bob's news outlet and nothing else ever, or Fox News, or just CNN, or whatever, right? You want to use multiple different sources and build build credible information out of that. Be careful about sensational news articles or sensational posts or sensational sources, right? This is a very common tactic in the news media to get people to view and read their information, right? So again, really you're assessing the credibility here. The next one is scrutinizing links and URLs. It sounds a little bit specific, but what I'm talking about here is if Bob or Nancy or anybody sends you an email or a social media message or a text message or whatever form of communication, and they send you a link, you really want to be careful on what you're doing there. So be very careful of shortened links, right? So you might see bit.ly or goo.gl. You'll see shortened links sometimes. So just be very careful with those and cognizant of that. So also, another thing you'll want to be careful with is, when somebody does send you a link and want to talk about scrutinizing, you want to hover over the link. I can create a link right now, a hyperlink, where if you're just reading it, it might say, Bob's hardware service. But if you hover over it, the actual URL or domain or link might say Nancy's malicious service, right? So be very careful with that. Even if my best friend sends me a link, I'm never even sure if maybe my best friend wasn't potentially compromised or socially engineered and they're sending me something fake, or anybody else, right? So I'm always very careful and I always try to go to the source. So the next one is tip 6, guarding your personal information. I personally think this is one that is often overlooked by people advising communities and others on how to stay safe online, right? You always want to be careful on anything that you share. You don't want to share any information with any unsolicited communication, for sure. You also want to be careful. You never want to share your banking information, login information, your seed phrases, nothing like that. Nobody ever needs that sort of information. Now, let's say you have a hobby in basket weaving or cryptocurrency. Now, sure, it's fine to tell people about that, but you should just be aware of the fact that the more knowledge and information somebody has about you, the more that they can use that to apply phishing and social engineering techniques. I see this in ransomware cases a lot, where the ransomware case for an industry or an enterprise company really started in the very beginning because the bad actor found out some information about some employee and was able to socially engineer them to get into the environment. So tip number 7, maintaining a skeptical mindset. Now I would challenge everybody to start trying to develop a fresh new mindset if you don't already have this. I think it's important to have a skeptical mindset. Sometimes there's a negative connotation that comes along with that, such as you might feel like you might be hurting the person or team's feelings. Well, in my opinion, they should and typically do respect and honor that skeptical mindset. So it's very important to have a healthy a healthy amount of that. I always approach everything with some skepticism, so I can force myself to be a little bit safer and cautious and slow down and look into things, right? If things are too good to be true, then they probably are. Tip number 8, and I'm almost done. Tip number 8, educate yourself and stay informed. This is really a tip for all of the other tips, right? You always want to be ensuring that you're using different resources to stay informed. on different pros and cons of whatever you're looking at, like I talked about earlier, not just relying on one thing. And this educating yourself and staying informed is really throughout the entire duration or life cycle that you are involved with or interested or watching something, whether it's a person building something or a team creating an application. Maybe they're coming out with a new version that you think might be going down the wrong path, or maybe they've been compromised themselves, things like that, right? So you're always educating and always staying informed. You don't just learn about something and then that's it, right? So tip number 9, this isn't really a part of my thought process, but this is something I pretty much try to always talk about, and no matter what the topic is. And I always try to remind people about passwords, password managers, and 2FA, right? So in some of the information, I linked up all the details for the deep dive of this conversation up above. And one of the things I talk about is password length. So there's charts out there you can look at the effectiveness of different password lengths. And I always try to suggest to people to use 12 plus characters and always include an uppercase, lowercase, a number, and a symbol. Furthermore, that becomes difficult to use, right? Because as passwords get long, they get complex, and you're using different passwords for different platforms. So you should look into a password manager. There's a lot of them out there. I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of that because that's an hour-long conversation. But look into something like a password manager, a local one, not a cloud-based one. The other point is a 2FA. Use something like Google Authenticator or YubiKey. I've talked about those a lot, so I'll stop there. And that was your bowl of